Hey guys, Scott Fishman here for Wrestling Inc. And outside the wrestling business, we have a feature series called One of Us, where we talk to those outside the business just about their fandom and just kind of getting their insight. And today we have a great guest. He wears a number of hats, including actor, podcaster, author. If you go on his website, he's also a comedian. If you go on his website, telephone call enthusiast. Chris Gethard, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a rainy day here in New Jersey. Outside of that, I have very little to complain about outside of it being 2020.
Yep, exactly. Well, I appreciate you joining us today. So if you could just go back, tell me about kind of when you first became a fan. Do you have like one memory that really stands out for you?
Well, I was born in 1980, so I was, that's the exact year, I think, for kids to get hooked on the rock and wrestling era. So, Hogan, Junkyard Dog, Rowdy Piper, Andre the Giant, the cartoon, like those became a cultural sensation when I was at a very formative age. So I definitely remember just kind of growing up, wrestling was a part of my life. My brother was a huge fan, and like many things, my older brother got me into it. Is one of the quick answers, but I tell you, I also remember the first album I ever owned was the wrestling album, the one that had, Roddy Piper singing For Everybody and Jimmy Hart singing Eat Your Heart Out, Rick Springfield. So I was just lucky enough to be born in an age where pop culture-wise you couldn't escape wrestling, and I've been on board ever since.
Now I just have visuals of Vince McMahon dancing in that music video. Now that you bring that up.
Land of a Thousand Dances, Hulk is such a yo-yo, classic lyric by Roddy Piper. Hulk is such a yo-yo.
So tell me about maybe how wrestling may have inspired, you in some ways as far as entertainment. Is there anyone kind of you find inspiration to when you kind of think about your upbringing in entertainment?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't even think I realized it along the way. But wrestling certainly has had an impact on how I approach things. Anybody who watched my old TV show, it's funny because the people who were also wrestling fans started to notice you really write your show in a way that mirrors wrestling. Like, I'm the face for most episodes hosting it, but then we would sometimes have some heel turns where I'd be the bad guy for an episode or two. We had run-ins. We had characters that had been pre-established, and they'd kind of appear out of nowhere, and I'd play it like I didn't know they were coming. They'd take over the show. So a lot of that. It's funny, Colt Cabana became a big part of our show. He and I became friends over the years, and he appeared a bunch of times. And he was one of the first people to call me out on it, where he's like, you just write in a wrestling style. So that really, I think, had an effect on my old TV show. And then even with stand-up, I think a lot about how really stand-up comedy, one of the main things you have to learn how to do is kind of control the crowd, control their emotions, kind of manipulate them in a direction you want them to go without them necessarily realizing they're being manipulated. And I actually think a lot about guys like Jake Roberts, Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, Ted DiBiase. I feel like those were people who really managed to work crowds up and control them. And then, you have the final match, that's the payoff match, and those feuds that they establish and drive. And I kind of have always felt like it's sort of similar. It's like as you're setting up a joke, you're setting up a story, that's the stretch where you're really trying to just control the crowd. And then the punchlines are the payoff. The punchlines are the blow-off match where everything comes to its conclusion and builds. So as far as crowd control and crowd manipulation, I don't think that you can find many better examples than, the cream of the crop of heel wrestlers.
Yeah. And you mentioned working with Colt Cabana. When you look back, do you remember the first time you met a wrestler and just what that experience was like? Growing up and you see these larger than life characters, and then you see them one right in front of you. I mean, that had to have been a cool experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I grew up in North Jersey, which was really, it's always been a hotbed for indie wrestling with Jersey All Pro, and then so much stuff at the Garden, and then the really big one for a lot of us my age was ECW, because they were nearby in Philly, and we'd go see them in Asbury Park. And if I remember right, around the time he had just switched from ECW run over to WWE, Mick Foley did a signing in Passaic, New Jersey. And I think that was the first time I ever went out and met a wrestler. He was just catching some bigger hype in WWE, but he hadn't been around long enough that he was above doing a signing in Passaic, New Jersey. So we were able to go out and meet him. And yeah, it's one of those things where you're watching this person who's a superhero, and especially him. Like, I'd seen all those old deathmatch tapes, and I was actually a huge fan of his in WCW, like huge. I loved Cactus Jack so much. And then you go and you're just in like a VFW hall in Passaic, New Jersey, and he's sitting behind an old card table. And, he's obviously a very good-humored guy who's very engaging, but you do have that moment where you're like, oh, it's not the superhero world I've been watching on TV my whole life.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned Mick Foley, someone who's done some stand-up and has his live shows. And you mentioned Jake Roberts earlier. What do you make of these wrestlers who have, done these kind of tours and been successful at it? Even Colt Cabana you talked about as well. So it seems you see like a little trend with those that you've interacted with. But what do you kind of make of their transition here, or their trying out?
I think it's really cool. I think there's certainly people who probably get territorial about it, but I feel like there's actually a lot of comedians who would say that there's a crossover in mentality and lifestyle with wrestlers. I've befriended a few wrestlers over the years, and I think this idea that, you kind of travel from gig to gig, you scrap it out. Sometimes you have to kind of corner a promoter after the show to get them to give you the pay you actually deserve. It's definitely, I think wrestling, I think wrestlers and stand-up comedians are definitely two of the last professions that have a little bit of the old carny lifestyle to them. You travel to the next town, and a lot of lonely nights of travel, and a lot of meals in Waffle Houses by yourself. So it makes sense to me that a lot of wrestlers look at the world of comedy and go, oh, I recognize this. I feel comfort in this. And at the end of the day, a lot of the people who have made that crossover are fantastic storytellers. I mean, you named Foley and Jake the Snake in there, and I don't think anybody would argue they are storytellers. And probably, I think in Mick's case, sort of infamously, he makes a lot of jokes about the fact that he doesn't have the physique of the Ultimate Warrior, but he knows how to tell a story, and he knows how to get a crowd psychology to go along with what he wants. So that's just kind of what comedy is. So more to him, God bless them. I'm sure they'll have to bomb as much as the rest of us bomb and figure it out on their feet, but I think they're well equipped to do it.
And, there's a lot of divide amongst wrestling, specifically, just the way wrestling is presented now. I mean, we're seeing just not that long ago, we had the AEW's Late Dinner Debonair, and then you had the Law and Otis this past week on SmackDown. So you're seeing these comedy segments. I feel like it's a delicate balance on a wrestling show where you want to have wrestlers be taken seriously, but also have these segments that are, entertaining. What do you think about kind of just where do you think we are as far as the presentation and the fine line, and what do you kind of think of these wrestlers kind of sticking outside the box, especially nowadays when there's no crowds a lot of times, or smaller crowds, and just the presentation and infusing comedy, but just doing it in a good way, because there's so many times where, you're, as you probably could relate to, there's a joke you might say like, oh man, I wish I had like a misfire, but like, and how do they react to that? So just talk about kind of just the dynamic of the comedy in the wrestling business.
Well, I think comedy's always been a part of the wrestling I love. Like, you look at Bobby the Brain Heenan, I think he's a supremely funny guy. And back when him and Gorilla Monsoon would effectively run like a talk show, on that old show on the USA Network. I think Roddy Piper was incredibly funny. I think those infamous vignettes where Mr. Perfect's throwing a football up in the air and then he runs and catches it himself, I think those are really, really funny. some of them aimed at being outright comedy. And, you know, look at the early days of Monday Night Raw where Heenan keeps getting kicked out and then he's dressing up as a woman and trying to sneak back in. And there's always been humor there, and I always appreciate when they go for it. I would say that, you know, as you mentioned, I think in modern times it feels like there's this weird push-pull where the comedy stuff can quickly go past the tipping point, especially in WWE. And I kind of feel like one of the things that probably helps the comedy and wrestling go down smooth is when the main event stuff and the top level stuff is really going well and engaging in its own right. You know, like if you have someone like Steve Austin at the top of the food chain, The Rock at the top of the food chain, and people can watch them and go, okay, now these are the legit badasses, then I think you can get away with Mr. Sacco after that. I think sometimes the comedy might stand out a little bit more and feel like it's going past the tipping point when the rest of the show isn't balancing it out as much, you know. And I mean no disrespect to WWE with that. It's just a matter of thinking about how things are balanced. It's like if the comedy takes too much focus or the stuff that's above it doesn't grab the viewer as much, then yeah, it's going to stand out as a little weird. But, you know, there's also the side of things with actual comedy wrestling, which, like I said, I'm buddies with Colt Cabana. I think he pioneered that in many ways. And, you know, you look at Orange Cassidy, you look at, you know, Kikutaru, right? Like, these are people who get over. And I think Colt was someone who was on the early wave of that, of like, yeah, this is unapologetically going to be funny. And it's actually been really cool to see him get embraced by AEW. And I feel like Orange Cassidy went up the ladder to a degree that was like, oh, this is turning a corner where people actually want to root for him even beyond the comedy side of it. Mm-hmm. He heard that and got over it through the comedy, which that's one of the first times I think I've seen that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Just like the little nuances he does is great, but then actually you see him as a wrestler, and it's like, wow, he's actually really good in the ring at times. I mean, here had some really good matches already.
Yeah, and it's not like a thing where he had to abandon his shtick. It's not like he had to stop doing it. There were moments where he busted out of it and showed the fire underneath it, right? But he still has his hands in his pockets, and he's wrestling Jericho. It's like pretty cool to see he didn't have to. They didn't make him sort of abandon that or sell it out to get there. Like, he still gets to do his shtick. He doesn't take off the sunglasses. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt. And a lot of folks know you also, wrestling fan-wise, as, you know, the Dark Side of the Ring After Dark host. Tell me kind of what that experience was like for you, and just what do you think of, you know, growing up a wrestling fan and seeing these stories get unraveled, you know, being told the way they have in such a unique way, even ones that we've heard from a while. Just what is it like to kind of collaborate and be a part of that show last season?
Well, I was thrilled to be asked. I was a fan of the first season of Dark Side of the Ring. I watched every single one. And I think it's just really brilliantly done. I think there's a reason it gets the attention it gets. I definitely have a lot of hope that they'll bring back the after show and I get to host it, because I tell you, it was supposed to be set in a studio in Brooklyn. It was going to have a lot more room for some comedic brainstorming, which felt like would be a nice thing to go, hey, we're still going to talk about wrestling. We're going to talk to people involved in the docs, but also you just watched like a super hard to swallow doc about Chris Benoit, so let's figure out a way to kind of come out of it and honor that and not disrespect that, but also let you have a bit of the night where it's, you get a couple of laughs, you get to decompress. And then obviously COVID hit. I was told that, you know, it was 3 days before our first shoot that I was told the production was being shut down, and I just figured the job was over. They said, no, we're going to do it all over webcams. And I think we were probably one of the first shows that had to convert to that, you know, doing it all off of Zoom or whatever. And definitely, you know, I had a lot of fun talking to the wrestlers, had a lot of fun exploring the topics, but hope I get in there after all the pandemic stuff is over and do it in that studio with some real bits and things where we can get up on our feet, and definitely feel like I want that opportunity again, because COVID really squeezed that one. I think that show could have been really great. I think we had some really good, interesting moments with what we did, but I think it could have been really, really great if we did it the way we're going to. So I want to get back in there and do it.
Have you remained in contact with the producers? I know they're putting together season 3 right now.
Yeah, I have a little bit. You know, they've picked up the documentary series. I haven't heard anything yet about the after show, and if they're going to pick that up as well. And you know, I just really hope, you know, like, I just hope they take a look at what happened this past year and go, you know what, like, I was literally shooting that. I had moved up to upstate New York and was living in my parents' house because they weren't in it at the time, so I could get out of New York, filming it off a webcam in my parents' bedroom with my laptop balanced on a Tupperware container to get it at the right height. I'm like, I hope they remember that that wasn't under ideal conditions and that we could really have something special if they bring the after show back. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I'm rooting for it.
I mean, with everything going on, you've had a good year when it comes to exposure. I mean, a lot of people were loving you on the Class Action Park, HBO Max. I know you have your podcast and a wealth of others. And if you want to just let people know where they can find you and just where they can hear your talents, and people can go back and watch the Dark Side of the Ring shows and really kind of see what you're talking about. But that's great, too, for wrestling fans. But beyond that, where can people kind of see where your projects are?
You can always follow me at chrisgeth.com, Chris Geth on Instagram, Chris Gethard on Twitter. And yeah, my podcast, Beautiful Anonymous, it's just I take a phone call each week from an anonymous person. And we actually just had an episode a few months back with a guy who is just coming out of wrestling school and talked a lot about what it's like to be a like right out of the gate indie wrestler. And he's still in that stretch where it's you know, he's getting $10 a night and has to set up the ring. So that might be really of interest to people. And yeah, the old episodes of Dark Side. The thing that I really thought would have spread was I interviewed Greg the Hammer Valentine after the Snuka episode, and he revealed a story where he claims that Vince McMahon helped Jimmy Snuka get off the hook for smuggling an intense amount of drugs from Israel. And I don't know that had been out there before, and I was really like, that's a scoop, man. That's a thing that should be going around. So those episodes are up there. I'm always doing the comedy stuff. I'm always doing my podcast, and yeah, I just hope people check it out and enjoy it.
Yeah, comedy is just so important, and we all need an escape right now. So you're doing a great thing for people in many ways.
I'm doing my best, man, trying to lighten things up, and I'm pretty lucky that my life is, you know, telling jokes and talking to people on the phone and then making jokes about Action Park every once in a while.
Sounds awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Hopefully maybe we can connect again when closer. Hopefully get that Dark Side post show for another season.
Yeah, me too. Fingers crossed, because I had a lot of fun with it, with what it was, and I would love to get in there and really do it right. So I hope everybody out there is rooting for it, because we could do some real cool stuff.
All right, you heard their producers. Get on that. Get the call ready. Thanks so much.
Let's get it going. Yeah, thank you.